Dr. Aria Blackwood never thought a single question could destroy her world. But as she stared at the test results sprawled across her desk at 2 am, her hands trembling, she realized some truths are too dangerous to uncover. The question that had made her famous was about to make her a target. Aria had spent 15 years building her reputation as one of Seattle's most respected criminal psychologists. Her clients trusted her, colleagues admired her research, and law enforcement agencies relied on her psychological profiles to catch killers. She lived alone in a modest apartment overlooking the Sound, preferring the company of case files to people. Relationships had always been complicated. For Aria, she analyzed everyone she met, searching for the hidden darkness that her work had taught her existed in the most ordinary faces. 3 months ago, during a routine session with Marcus Webb, a suspected serial killer awaiting trial, Aria had stumbled upon something extraordinary. Marcus had been charming, articulate, and seemingly cooperative during their sessions. Like so many psychopaths, he wore normalcy like a perfectly tailored suit. But Sarah had developed a single question over years of research, a question that seemed to bypass all psychological defenses. If you could relive any moment from your childhood, but you had to experience it as your victim did, which moment would you choose? The question was deceptively simple, but the neurological response it triggered in psychopaths was unmistakable. Their pupils dilated differently, their micro-expressions shifted in predictable patterns, and their brain activity, as measured by the portable EEG she'd started using, showed distinct anomalies. Marcus had laughed when she asked it, a sound that made Aria's skin crawl. "That's an interesting question, Dr. Blackwood. Most people assume psychopaths don't have victims in childhood, but we do. We just create them." His answer had been textbook psychopathic deflection, but his physical response told a different story. The EEG readings showed the exact pattern Aria had theorized would appear in individuals with severe antisocial personality disorder. Over the following weeks, Aria had tested her question on 12 other subjects, some convicted criminals, others volunteers from her university's psychology department. The results were staggering. Every individual who scored high on the Hare psychopathy checklist showed the same neurological signature when confronted with her question. Those who scored low showed completely different patterns. She had potentially discovered the first reliable biological test for psychopathy. Aria's excitement had quickly turned to obsession. She worked 18-hour days, refining her methodology and documenting everything. She barely ate, rarely slept, and ignored calls from her sister in Portland, who worried about her increasingly erratic behavior. But the potential implications of her discovery were too significant to ignore. Courts could use this test to determine sentencing. Employers could screen potential hires. Parents could understand their troubled children. Tonight, as rain pelted her office windows, Aria had finally compiled her complete findings. The data was irrefutable. Her question worked with 96% accuracy. But as she prepared to submit her research to the Journal of Abnormal Psychology, something had made her pause. She decided to test the question one more time on herself, just to confirm the control group baseline. The EEG sensors felt cold against her temples as she activated the recording equipment. Arya looked into the mirror she depositioned across from her desk and asked herself the question that had consumed her life. If you could relive any moment from your childhood, but you had to experience it as your victim did, which moment would you choose? The memory came instantly. She was 8 years old, standing in her backyard with her neighbor's cat, Mr. Whiskers. The cat had been annoying her all week, knocking over her science projects and leaving paw prints on her bedroom window. Arya remembered the satisfaction she'd felt when she'd finally caught the animal. She remembered the strange calm that had washed over her as she held it under water in the old rain barrel behind the garden shed. But what terrified her now wasn't the memory itself, it was watching the EEG readings as she recalled it. The familiar pattern blazed across her computer screen, the same neurological signature she documented in 12 convicted psychopaths. Arya's hands shook as she removed the sensors, the truth hitting her like physical blow. She wasn't just studying psychopaths. She was one of them. And tomorrow morning, she had appointments with 5 new clients, including 2 children whose parents trusted her completely. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She sat in her apartment, staring at the gray waters of Puget Sound as dawn crept across the sky, trying to reconcile 15 years of helping people with the horrifying possibility that she might be the very thing she dedicated her life to studying. The EEG results felt like a death sentence, but she couldn't ignore the scientific method that had guided her entire career. She needed more data. By 7 a.m., Sarah was back in her office, pulling files she'd never wanted to examine. Her own psychological evaluations from graduate school, performance reviews, colleague assessments, anything that might provide clues about her true nature. The picture that emerged was troubling. Professors had noted her unusual emotional detachment and clinical approach to human suffering. One supervisor had written that Sarah seemed more interested in the mechanics of trauma than its human impact. But it was her own therapy notes that proved most damning. During her required therapy sessions in graduate school, Sarah had discussed her childhood with clinical precision, describing events that should have been traumatic with the detached curiosity of a scientist. The death of her parents in a car accident when she was 16. The way she'd felt nothing at their funeral. How she'd been more fascinated by the other mourner's grief than affected by her own loss. Her first client that morning was Detective Ray Morrison, a 20-year police veteran struggling with PTSD after a particularly brutal crime scene. Sarah had been treating Ray for 6 months, and he trusted her completely. As he settled into the leather chair across from her desk, describing his nightmares and anxiety attacks, Sarah found herself studying him like a specimen. She watched how his hand shook when he talked about the murdered family he'd discovered. She noted the way his voice cracked when he mentioned the children. "I keep wondering if I'm losing my mind, Doc," Ray said, his eyes filled with genuine anguish. "Sometimes I can't tell if what I'm feeling is normal or if I'm broken somehow." Sarah felt a cold recognition in his words. She'd been asking herself the same question, but for entirely different reasons. "What does broken mean to you, Ray?" she asked, her voice steady and professional, even as her world crumbled around her. "Like something essential is missing. Like I can't connect with people the way I used to." Ray wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "My wife says I'm becoming someone she doesn't recognize." The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. Here was a man tortured by his capacity to feel too much, seeking help from someone who might not feel anything at all. She continued the session mechanically, offering the same evidence-based treatments she'd used for years, but her heart wasn't in it. How could it be when she wasn't sure she had one? After Ray left, Sarah canceled her remaining appointments and drove to the University of Washington's Neurological Research Facility. Dr. Elena Vasquez, her former mentor, agreed to run a comprehensive brain scan without asking too many questions. Sarah had always been Elena's most promising student, and their relationship had evolved into something resembling friendship over the years. "You look terrible, Sarah," Elena said as she prepared the fMRI machine. "When's the last time you slept? I need you to look at my amygdala and prefrontal cortex," Sarah replied, avoiding the question. "I'm working on a research project about empathy responses, and I need baseline readings." The MRI chamber felt like a coffin. As the machine hummed and clicked around her, Sarah thought about all the scans she'd reviewed over the years. The brains of murderers, rapists, and child abusers. The distinctive patterns that marked them as different from the rest of humanity. She'd always taken comfort in those differences, in the clear biological lines that separated normal people from monsters. 2 hours later, Elena called her back to review the results. The older woman's expression was grave as she pulled up Sarah's brain scans on the large monitor. "I'm not sure what kind of research you're conducting, but these results are unusual." Sarah's amygdala, the brain region responsible for processing fear and emotional memories, was significantly smaller than average. Her prefrontal cortex showed reduced activity in areas associated with empathy and moral reasoning. The patterns were subtle, not as extreme as those found in violent criminals, but they were undeniably there. "Have you ever been evaluated for antisocial personality traits?" Elena asked carefully. The question hung in the air like a blade. Sarah had spent her career asking similar questions of others, but hearing it directed at herself felt like a physical blow. "What would you recommend for someone with these scan results?" she managed to ask. Elena studied her former student with new eyes. Honestly, intensive therapy and careful monitoring. These patterns don't necessarily mean someone will become violent, but they do suggest significant challenges with emotional processing and interpersonal relationships. As Sarah drove home through Seattle traffic, she couldn't stop thinking about her clients, all the people who had trusted her with their deepest traumas and fears. Detective Morrison, struggling with emotions she might never truly understand. The teenagers she counseled, looking for guidance from someone who might be incapable of genuine human connection. The families of victims who relied on her psychological profiles to find justice. That evening, Sarah opened her laptop and began typing a letter of resignation. But as she stared at the blank document, a darker thought crept into her mind. If she really was a psychopath, did that make her insights into criminal behavior more valuable or completely worthless? And more importantly, how many other mental health professionals might be hiding the same terrible secret? Her phone buzzed with a text from Detective Morrison. "Thanks for today, Doc. You're the only one who really understands what I'm going through." Sarah stared at the message, feeling something that might have been guilt or might have been nothing at all. She wasn't sure she could tell the difference anymore. Sarah spent the weekend researching every psychological professional in Seattle, cross-referencing their backgrounds with unsolved cases and unexplained client outcomes. What she discovered made her question everything she thought she knew about her field. Dr. Michael Torres, who specialized in adolescent therapy, had an unusually high number of teenage clients who later committed violent crimes. Dr. Rebecca Walsh, a couples counselor, seemed to have a pattern of relationships ending in domestic violence after her interventions. Were these coincidences, or was Sarah uncovering something more sinister? The possibility that other psychopaths had infiltrated mental health care felt both terrifying and oddly validating. If she wasn't alone, maybe her condition didn't make her a monster, just a different kind of predator hiding in plain sight. Monday morning brought a call that changed everything. Detective Lisa Park from the Seattle Police Department needed Sarah's expertise on a new case. "We've got a situation that's right up your alley, Doc." 3 different therapists, all found dead in their offices over the past month. No signs of forced entry, no robbery, no obvious motive. But each victim had your business card in their appointment book. Sarah's blood turned to ice. She'd never met any of the deceased therapists, had never even heard their names. What were their specialties? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. All 3 worked with trauma victims and violent offenders. Just like you. Detective Park's voice carried a note of concern. "We need to know if there's a connection. And Sarah, we need to make sure you're safe." The police station felt different when Sarah arrived that afternoon. Officers who had once greeted her warmly now watched her with suspicious eyes. The 3 case files spread across the conference table told a story that made her skin crawl. Dr. Amanda Foster, found at her desk with no apparent cause of death. Dr. James Liu, discovered in his office chair, looking peaceful as if he'd simply fallen asleep. Dr. Karen Stevens, slumped over her computer, a half-written patient note still on the screen. "The medical examiner is baffled," Detective Park explained. "No wounds, no signs of struggle, no obvious poisons in their systems. It's like they just ... stopped." Sarah studied the crime scene photos with the clinical detachment that had always been her strength. But now she wondered if her emotional distance was really professional objectivity or something far more disturbing. "Have you interviewed their recent clients?" she asked. "We're working on it, but patient confidentiality is making things complicated. That's where we need your help." Detective Park pulled out a thick folder. "We need psychological profiles on anyone who might have had access to all 3 victims. Someone smart enough to kill without leaving evidence, organized enough to plan multiple murders, and connected enough to know these specific therapists. As Sarah reviewed the files, a pattern emerged that made her stomach drop. Each victim had been researching psychopathy. Dr. Foster had published papers on antisocial personality disorder in healthcare workers. Dr. Liu had been developing screening tools for identifying psychopathic traits in professional settings. Dr. Stevens had been investigating cases of therapist-induced trauma in vulnerable patients. They were all studying the same thing, Sarah whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. What thing? Detective Park leaned forward, sensing a breakthrough. Sarah couldn't bring herself to say it out loud. Instead, she pulled out her phone and showed Detective Park the research she'd been conducting on her colleagues. I think someone is targeting therapists who are investigating psychopathy in mental health care. Over the next several hours, Sarah helped the police identify other potential targets. Every psychologist, psychiatrist, and counselor in the Seattle area who had published research on antisocial personality disorder or worked extensively with psychopathic patients. The list was longer than anyone expected, nearly 24 professionals who could be in danger. As the day wore on, Sarah found herself at the center of the investigation. Her expertise in criminal psychology made her invaluable, but her connection to the case made her a potential target. Detective Park assigned protective surveillance, and Sarah felt the walls of her carefully constructed life closing in around her. That evening, alone in her apartment with a police officer stationed outside, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She pulled out her EEG equipment and set up a video camera. If she was going to die, she wanted to leave behind proof of what she'd discovered. She wanted the world to know that psychopaths weren't just hiding in prisons and psychiatric hospitals. They were wearing white coats and sitting in therapy offices, trusted with society's most vulnerable people. She positioned herself in front of the camera and asked herself the question one more time. If you could relive any moment from your childhood, but you had to experience it as your victim did, which moment would you choose? This time, she didn't just remember the cat. She remembered the feeling of power, the satisfaction of control, the complete absence of guilt or remorse. And as the EEG recorded her brain's response, Sarah realized that her question wasn't just a diagnostic tool, it was a confession. But before she could analyze the results, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Detective Park's number, but the voice on the other end was different. Calm, cultured, familiar in a way that made Sarah's skin crawl. "Hello, Dr. Chen. I think we need to talk." The line went dead, and Sarah heard the unmistakable sound of her front door opening. The police officer outside was nowhere to be seen. The figure standing in Sarah's doorway was Dr. Michael Torres, the adolescent therapist she'd researched just days earlier. In the dim light of her apartment, he looked nothing like the compassionate professional from his clinic website. His smile was too wide, his eyes too bright, and he moved with the fluid grace of a predator who had found his prey. "Please, don't be alarmed," Torres said, closing the door behind him with careful precision. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here because we're the same, Dr. Chen. And it's time you understood what that really means. Sarah's training kicked in even as terror flooded her system. She studied Torres's posture, his micro-expressions, the way he positioned himself between her and any possible escape route. Everything about him screamed calculated control. "Where's the police officer?" she managed to ask. "Officer Martinez. He's taking a little nap in his car. Don't worry, he'll wake up with nothing more than a headache and a gap in his memory." Torres moved into her living room as if he'd been invited, his gaze taking in the EEG equipment and video camera she'd set up. Interesting setup. Testing yourself again? The fact that he knew about her research sent chills down Sarah's spine. "How long have you been watching me?" "Since you published your first paper on psychopathic behavior in adolescence. I've been very interested in your work." Torres settled into her armchair with unsettling familiarity. "You see, Sarah, may I call you Sarah? You've been asking the wrong questions. You want to identify us, expose us, study us like laboratory rats. But you never stop to ask why we're drawn to this profession in the first place." Sarah remained standing, her mind racing through possible escape scenarios. The kitchen knife block was 12 feet away. Her cell phone was on the coffee table between them. The window led to a 3-story drop. "Why?" she asked. "Buying time." "Because we're exceptional at it." Torres's smile widened. "Think about it. Who better to manipulate human psychology than someone who isn't constrained by human emotion? Who better to identify weakness and exploit vulnerability than someone born without empathy? We don't just study the human mind, we own it. You killed those therapists. It wasn't a question. I eliminated competition. Foster was developing screening tools that could expose us. Liu was creating diagnostic criteria that were uncomfortably accurate. Stevens was documenting cases that could lead back to our community. Torres leaned forward, his voice taking on an almost conversational tone. They had to be stopped. Just like you'll have to be stopped if you continue down this path. Sarah's professional curiosity warred with her survival instincts. How many of us are there? More than you'd imagine. We gravitate toward positions of power and trust. Therapists, surgeons, CEOs, politicians, judges, anywhere we can exercise control over others while maintaining societal respect. Torres pulled out a tablet and showed Sarah a list of names she recognized. Mental health professionals from across the country, all connected by subtle patterns of client outcomes and research interests. We're not random psychopaths, Sarah. We're an ecosystem. The scope of what Torres was describing hit Sarah like a physical blow. You're organized. We're evolved. While other psychopaths end up in prison or dead, we've learned to channel our nature into socially acceptable forms. We help people in our own way. We provide services that neurotypical therapists simply can't deliver. His voice carried a note of pride. When someone needs to compartmentalize trauma, who better to teach them than someone who's naturally compartmentalized? When someone needs to develop emotional distance from their problems, who better to guide them than someone who lives that way? Sarah thought about her own clients, Detective Morrison, the traumatized teenagers, the families of victims. Had she actually helped them, or had she been grooming them for her own psychological experiments? What do you want from me? I want you to stop your research and join us. Your diagnostic question is brilliant, but it's dangerous in the wrong hands. Imagine what law enforcement could do with a reliable test for psychopathy. Imagine the witch hunts, the discrimination, the systematic elimination of people like us. Torres stood up, moving closer to Sarah. But imagine what we could do with it. Imagine being able to identify our own kind, to build a network of truly exceptional individuals working together. And if I refuse? Torres's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Then you'll join your research subjects in a very permanent way. But I don't think you'll refuse, Sarah. I think you're finally starting to understand what you really are. He was right, and that terrified her more than his threats. Standing in her own living room, face to face with someone who might be her mirror image, Sarah felt a strange sense of recognition. The clinical detachment she'd always attributed to professionalism. The way she studied human emotion like a foreign language. The satisfaction she'd felt when successfully manipulating a client's psychological state. I need time to think, she said. Of course. But not too much time. Torres moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Sarah, your question works both ways. Ask yourself this. If you could relive any moment from your professional career, but you had to experience it as your client did, which moment would you choose? I think you'll find the answer very illuminating. After he left, Sarah sat in her darkened apartment, staring at the EEG equipment that had started this nightmare. She thought about every client she'd ever treated, every profile she'd created, every recommendation she'd made to law enforcement. How many people had she hurt while convincing herself she was helping them? Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. 24 hours, Sarah. Then we'll need your answer. Outside, Officer Martinez was waking up in his patrol car, confused and disoriented. The investigation would continue tomorrow, but Sarah knew the real predator had already been inside her apartment, inside her head, showing her a mirror she wasn't sure she wanted to look into. Sarah didn't sleep. She spent the night pacing her apartment, wrestling with a decision that would define not just her future, but her fundamental understanding of who she was. Every psychology textbook she'd ever read, every ethical guideline she'd sworn to uphold, every promise she'd made to help rather than harm, all of it felt like a carefully constructed lie she'd been telling herself for years. At dawn, she made a series of phone calls that would change everything. First, to Detective Park, reporting Torres's visit and requesting immediate protection for every therapist on the list they'd compiled. Second, to Dr. Elena Vasquez, asking her to prepare for an emergency consultation. Third, to the Seattle Times, requesting a meeting with their investigative journalism team. By noon, Sarah found herself in the newspaper's conference room, facing 3 reporters and a photographer. She'd brought copies of her research, Torres's tablet screenshots, and something that could destroy her career. A complete recording of his confession from the hidden, audio device she'd activated the moment he'd entered her apartment. "What you're describing sounds like a conspiracy theory," said veteran reporter Janet Walsh, studying the documents Sarah had provided. "You're claiming there's an organized network of psychopaths working as mental health professionals. I'm claiming there's a pattern of individuals with psychopathic traits who are drawn to positions of power and trust," Sarah corrected. "They may not be formally organized, but they recognize each other and protect their interests. Some of them eliminate threats to their continued operation." The recording of Torres's voice filled the room, his casual admission of murder sending chills through everyone present. By the time it finished, the reporter's skepticism had transformed into focused intensity. This was bigger than a serial killer. This was systematic infiltration of institutions, designed to protect society's most vulnerable people. "We'll need independent verification of everything," Walsh said. "Medical records, police reports, psychological evaluations. This story could bring down entire mental health systems." Sarah nodded. "I've prepared a list of cases you should investigate. Client suicides that might not have been suicides. Treatment outcomes that seem designed to increase rather than decrease psychological trauma. Therapists whose patients show unusual patterns of dependency or self-harm." Over the next several hours, Sarah laid out everything she'd discovered. The biological markers that indicated psychopathic traits, the diagnostic question that had started her investigation, the brain scans that had revealed her own condition. By the end of the session, she'd essentially confessed to being the very thing she was helping to expose. "Why are you doing this?" asked reporter David Kim. "If you really are a psychopath, why risk everything to stop others like you?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Because maybe having this condition doesn't automatically make someone a monster. Maybe recognizing it is the first step toward choosing to be something better." She paused, thinking about Detective Morrison and all her other clients. "Or maybe I'm just a different kind of predator, one who hunts other predators." Her phone buzzed with a text from Torres. "Time's up, Sarah. What's your decision?" Sarah showed the message to the reporters, then typed her response while they watched. "I choose to be human." 3 hours later, Seattle police raided Torres's clinic and home simultaneously. They found evidence linking him to all 3 murders, along with detailed files on dozens of mental health professionals across the country. Computer records revealed communications with individuals in similar positions, a loose network of psychopaths who shared information and protected each other's interests. Torres was arrested without incident, his calm demeanor never wavering even as officers read him his rights. When Detective Park asked if he had anything to say, he smiled that same too-wide smile and looked directly into the news camera capturing his arrest. "Dr. Chen thinks she can choose to be human," he said. "But you can't choose your nature. You can only choose how well you hide it." The story broke the following morning with headlines that sent shockwaves through the mental health community. Professional licensing boards launched investigations. Ethics committees demanded reviews of thousands of cases. Patients began questioning whether their trusted therapists might be manipulating rather than healing them. Sarah became the face of the crisis, part whistleblower, part cautionary tale. She submitted to extensive psychological evaluation, agreed to constant monitoring, and accepted that her career as she'd known it was over. But she also began working with law enforcement to develop better screening procedures for mental health professionals. In her final session with Detective Morrison, Sarah made a decision that surprised them both. She told him the truth about her condition, about her research, about the investigation that had consumed her life. "So everything you've told me, all the help you've given me, was any of it real?" Morrison asked, his face a mixture of betrayal and confusion. "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "I can't tell the difference between genuine empathy and learned behavior. But I can tell you this: your pain is real, your trauma matters, and you deserve better than someone like me trying to fix problems I might not even understand." As Morrison left her office for the last time, Sarah realized that admitting her limitations might be the most honest thing she'd ever done as a therapist. She couldn't cure herself of being a psychopath, but she could choose to stop pretending to be something she wasn't. 6 months later, Sarah published a book about her experience, part confession, part warning, part guide for identifying psychological manipulation in therapeutic settings. The proceeds went to victim advocacy groups, and she donated her time to training law enforcement officers in recognizing psychopathic behavior in professional settings. She never practiced therapy again, but she found a different kind of purpose in protecting others from predators who wore helping professions as camouflage. In her own way, using her unique insights into the psychopathic mind, Sarah had finally learned what it meant to truly help people. The question that had started her journey, the one that exposed hidden psychopaths, became the foundation for new, diagnostic tools used worldwide. But Sarah knew it was also a reminder that the most dangerous monsters are often the ones we trust most, the ones who understand exactly what we need to hear and how to make us believe they care. Sometimes the greatest act of humanity is admitting you might not be human at all. Ready for more psychological thrillers that will keep you awake at night? Subscribe now for stories that expose the dark truths hiding behind professional facades. Share this story if it made you question everyone you trust, and let us know in the comments, have you ever suspected your therapist might be hiding something sinister? Don't forget to hit that notification bell for more mind-bending investigations into the psychology of evil that walks among us.